Welcome to the Accounting Arc Podcast, where analysis, reaction, and comedy collide to tackle the big topics from the world of accounting and beyond. Join our trio of transformation agents as they discuss the hottest topics in and out of the profession, from breaking down industry trends, to reacting to everyday events, to uncovering the hidden humor in numbers. With wisdom, insight, and a dash of levity, they're proving that accounting isn't just about the numbers. It's about life. Because after all, accounting is in everything. The Accounting Arc Podcast starts now.
Hey everyone, we are back again, and today we're going to take a look at the bigger picture of the profession. And sometimes people go, well, what does that really mean? Part of the thing for me, when I first got involved, I was first involved at our state society level. We'll explain what that is level later. And what I also then got involved later is with the AICPA, which I think of as the national level. And eventually, I actually got involved with the international level, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. And we thought, well, this might be interesting because not a lot of people necessarily know that there's all these different levels and different parts of the profession, different disciplines within the profession that's actually going on. So one of you guys want to kick us off and maybe start with the state society?
Yeah, well, I mean, Donny's intro basically just said, well, I'm an international accounting badass. So listen to what I have to say, which I will agree with wholeheartedly. So the state societies, I think most people, most CPAs know them as the people that do their annual trainings, right? You have to get CPE to maintain your CPA. This is an acronym loaded episode, guys. So get your pencils out because we're going to fill in that glossary of terms that you need to hold a CPA license. But I would say the biggest thing that they do at the state level that most CPAs are aware of is that CPE. Unfortunately, that's only a subset of what state societies do, and the awareness of the rest of it gets kind of clouded. Like, I know, Byron, you're in a state in Maryland with a wonderful state society, right? What are some of the things that you guys do?
Oh man, yeah, I am definitely very fortunate to be in the state of Maryland, and Maryland has historically had a very strong state association, and so obviously training, but not just the technical. A lot of states focus on just the pure technical training, where Maryland has been really good at broadening the types of training and opportunities that go beyond just, the tax updates and the A&A updates and those types of things. We have a very strong advocacy organization that is involved with our state government. So when it comes to legislation that impacts CPAs or constituents of CPAs, we share our voice in the state assembly, especially as it relates to a lot of business related legislation. So you have those. We also have communities or basically like small committees of different people who are in nonprofit and government or in CFO roles or in technology roles that allow them to interact and even create some conferences which have specific content for those populations and those groups, in addition to just a wide variety of activities that just promote the community associated with being a Maryland CPA. So, the Maryland Association of CPAs is definitely a really strong and active organization. Our CEO is Becca Brown, who is also a CPA, and she basically came from within the profession and is continuing to lead and look for things. For example, I'm actually doing some AI training for CPAs in the state of Maryland, and that's something that the MACPA was looking to do to muscle up CPAs in the state of Maryland. So there are a lot of things there in addition to interacting with the State Board of Accountancy, which is a really important role that I think is also commonly misunderstood amongst that relationship between state boards of state boards of accountancy and state associations.
I'm thinking, since you mentioned it, do you want to explain what a state board of accountancy does?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to breathe there for a moment because I've almost blacked out and talking about all the great things that go on here in Maryland. But so the State Board of Accountancy is the government organization that is part of the state government, and every single jurisdiction has their own individual state board of accountancy. And that board is responsible for the professional licensing of CPAs in the state, and not only responsible for the licensing, but as a result, all of the rules around that licensing. Where it gets a little bit confusing is there are some things that the State Board of Accountancy, and I'm not an expert in all these things myself, but there are some rules that they can implement as an organization, as a governing body of CPAs. There are other rules that they actually have to have legislation passed within the state government in order to implement. And one of the popular ones, of course, is the 150 credit hour rule, because that is an element of the requirements to become a CPA in the state. Therefore, that has to be legislated by the state government. There's other rules around like professional ethics and the things that you can do as a CPA in the state, where the actual state board of accountancy can actually implement and enforce those rules. So as a result, the state associations tend to be as active as possible with the state board to ensure that the voice of the CPAs is represented inside those rooms. And that's not true in all states. There are some states where those two groups do not talk, and there is very little communication there. There's kind of a firewall there, where there's other states where there's a really active relationship. Maryland happens to be one of those.
Yeah, well, and to expound upon that a bit, right? So the board is enforcing the laws, right? The legislation of the state for CPA licensure, firm licensure for any issues. So if there's a complaint on your license, the board of accountancy is the board that will hear it, right? They'll have a formal hearing. There's a whole process that happens in each state dependent on state laws. That process can be a little bit different, but for the most part, it goes, complaint. The board reads the complaint, decides if it's valid, issues, a letter to the CPA or the firm in question. Then the firm has normally 30 to 60 days to respond. They respond, go in front of the board, present their case, and then the board makes a decision. Sometimes those hearings can take a little bit longer. There's a back and forth response period, but that's dependent on state law, like everything else in this country, right? I can tell you a fun distinction about enforcing law versus changing law. When I went to get licensed, I was licensed originally in Nevada, which at the time was the strictest state to have licensure. You had to have 150 hours before you could even sit for the exam, right? And you had to prove that. And so I was looking at it. I had graduated with my undergraduate degrees. I had two of them, one in accounting, one in finance. I had 135 credit hours, not 150 credit hours, but I had all the upper division accounting requirements of that 150-hour rule. And so I said, all right, I just need to get 15 whatever credits, right? And so I took one legitimate, it was like a study at home program through like the University of Virginia, and they sent me a textbook and a bunch of stuff. This was before, real online learning existed, dating myself a bit. And it was a correspondence class. I did all my work. It was a lot of work. I did an audit class because I felt like that was my weakest area and I wanted to learn more. It took forever. It was expensive. I got 3 credit hours and it was a lot of brain damage during busy season while I'm studying. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. So I looked at the Nevada rules. I'm like, okay, well, I just need these credits to show up on a transcript. I don't need to do anything else. So I went to the community college and I said, hey, what courses can I take quickly? And they're like, well, you could take this basic Excel course. And I'm like, okay, well, I know Excel inside and out. Do I really have to sit through this course? And they were like, well, technically you can challenge a course, take the final exam. Whatever you get on the final exam is your grade on your transcript. And I'm like, done, in, sign me up for that. So I challenged Excel, bookkeeping 1, bookkeeping 2, and all of a sudden I had 12 credit hours in 2 weeks on a transcript with a grade that I could print out and send with my application to get the 150. Well, long story short, not really, long story long, but I send my transcripts in, I get approved, I sit for the exam, I pass it, I'm doing really well. State Board of Accountancy sends me a letter and they're like, hey, you did this wrong. Like the dates on this transcript are post you graduating with your bachelor's degree and you're taking like 100 level classes. Like this is wrong. And I'm like, this does not violate the legislation of the state of Nevada. So I wrote a whole letter back responding to them saying, you are wrong. I am totally eligible for my CPA license. In fact, I've already taken and passed multiple sections of the exam based on this. If you believe this should not occur, you need to change the law. You don't need to penalize me. The board reviewed it and realized I was correct. I was following the letter of the law.
Of course.
And I had done everything above board and correctly. So the board then proposed an adjustment to the rules that they called the Mason exception and put that in front of the Nevada state legislation. And the legislators passed it. And so there was an exception after I had already gotten through all of this and gotten my CPA license that you couldn't do what I did to get your 150 credit hours. So that's a great example of the board having to change the law to enforce what they think it should be versus what it says.
So fun fact, there's legislation named after you. And
well, the proposal was, but the actual legislation didn't maintain the name.
Somehow not surprising.
We should bridge that then into, so this legislation is relatively standardized. I'm putting air quotes around that because we have what is the Uniform Accountancy Act, which is actually going through revision right now because of the 150-hour changes that all the states are doing. This is why there was so much concern about changing the 150, because this Uniform Act, which is a model act, here's another acronym. I think it was promoted by NASBA, National Association of the State Boards of Accountancies, which is all these
Write it down, guys.
state boards of accountancies all banding to having a unified view across that. That parallels the AICPA, add that to your acronyms, the, what is it, American Institute of CPAs, which is, I think of that as our national association for CPAs. So the state societies effectively collaborate with the AICPA on the practitioner or the professional side. And then we've got the State Board of Accountancies coordinating with NASBA on the state and regulatory side. And both of them usually work together on this Uniform Accountancy Act, which each of the state societies usually takes to the legislatures and to the state boards, and they work together to try and get these things passed, so that we have mobility amongst all of the states as us as CPAs move between different states. We're allowed to practice to varying degrees.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, so NASBA is their role, in addition to being the Association for State Boards of Accountancy, is they manage CPE rules. And for the states who have adopted NASBA's rules for CPE. So
you threw out an acronym, you better define it.
For NASBA?
Continuing Professional Education.
Oh, CPE. I forgot that's even an acronym. You're right. So for continuing professional education, you have to register with NASBA in order to issue continuing education credits to CPAs for that to qualify. Now, there are some states who actually do not follow NASBA's guidance with respect to CPE. That gets complicated there. But so you have NASBA and then, substantial equivalency, which is part of the Uniform Accountancy Act. And that's where some of the challenge goes in. In fact, Liz's story back in the day was before the uniform CPA rules, and therefore every single state had different rules. In fact, when I got my CPA in Maryland, some people would go to Delaware because you could still get your CPA in Delaware at 120 credit hours, where Maryland had just implemented 150 credit hours. So there was a lot of gaming of people going to different states to sit for the exam in different states. But then in order to practice as a CPA in another state, you had to go through a lot of filing of things with that state in order to qualify, which, now it's a lot easier and to go from state to state. But all of that comes back to the state boards that manage all of that.
So after this, we're going to have a string chart showing you the relations between all of this because it gets quite complicated. And I think the first interaction with NASBA that most CPAs have is when you're applying to take the uniform CPA exam, right? Because they also administer that. And that's generally your first interaction with them. It will not be your last. And also, the way they interact, as Byron explained, is generally through the boards of accountancy and through administering CPE. And so, you generally, as an individual, aren't really interacting with them. They're a thing that exists that you do have to know about and understand their role. But the direct interaction does happen with the CPA exam.
So I'm curious for both of you. I mean, Liz, I know you've been involved over the years with the Arizona Society of CPAs. Donnie, I know you've been involved with Hawaii in addition to many other state societies, but specific to your like home states, how do they compare to the things that I described that Maryland does as for an association or society?
Yeah, Arizona does a lot of the same things you described. One of the best experiences I actually had with them was as a very young professional. They put me through media training and effectively, put me on a list of like, if anyone calls from a news outlet and needs, a CPA to comment on something, here's our list of approved CPAs that have gone through the media training that are now allowed to go on local TV or radio, right? And I just thought that was super cool because it was something I had never been exposed to. I was in my early 20s, and I clearly love talking. So any opportunity to talk more, I was like, yeah, absolutely. Teach me how to do this better.
It's funny you say that because I was actually going to say in the beginning, I was like, I think this is the longest we've ever got Byron to talk continuously when he was explaining the state society. Hawaii is actually very similar. The one additional thing, which I also know Arizona and Maryland do, is all of us actually do a lot of work with students. So Hawaii Society of CPAs serves as a bridge to all of the universities and colleges here in the state, and they organize events like Meet the Professionals and things, which I think are great opportunities. So if any of your students are listening, you have the opportunity to participate in these Meet the Pros or Meet the Professionals because you get to actually talk to other people like us that are actually doing the work and find out what it's like in the real world as an accounting professional.
Yeah, and then I've done some other really cool stuff with the State Society. Like every year they do the game of life with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and you get to sit down with like a bunch of kids and their big brother, big sister, and play the game and then talk about the implications of all the things on the board, right? And what that means from a financial perspective. So that's part of their like financial literacy outreach. And there's a bunch of other community service things that state societies do. And generally those stem from the committees that Byron was talking about. So you have committees focused on different areas, but there's also, ways that they get involved in the community outside of just the accounting community. And how do we branch out and help small businesses? How do we put people in front of the Chamber of Commerce that know what they're talking about when they're talking about accounting or funding, right? How do we make sure that we're working with kids in the community outside of just education and giving them exposure to these concepts that a lot of times they don't get at home or don't get effectively in the public school system?
Yeah, that's so many great examples of opportunities to get involved. And that is one of my like number one pieces of advice that when I talk to somebody young and starting their career in the profession is to get involved with the state society. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, my involvement from very early in my career with the Maryland Association changed the trajectory of my career and for the positive. And frequently you talk to people about, we pay a lot of dues. We pay AICPA dues and state society dues, and in addition to other associations and other groups. And people say, well, why, like, I get CPE from other places, so why should I pay my dues to my state society? And a lot of times I'll tell people, well, if you're not going to get involved with them and you're not going to take any of the benefits, then don't. You're just burning your money. But I cannot imagine. I have gladly paid my dues every single year. In fact, it's monthly here in Maryland. And I have gotten so much back because I've chosen to be involved and volunteer at the state level that the benefits are so obvious if you just spend a little bit of time getting involved.
Hey, Byron, can you talk about why you're so passionate about this topic? Get a little personal for a second.
Yeah, get a little well, I mean, so I was so when I started my career, I started my career with a small CPA firm. The owner of that firm at the time was the chair of the Maryland Association of CPAs. And here I am, a young accountant, not even a CPA yet. Had to sit a few times for the exam to pass that. But here the owner of the firm said, "You're coming with me," and took me to this meeting. I had no idea what it was about, what was going on. And all of a sudden I was in this room with all these experienced badass CPAs talking about the future of the profession and how we were going to try to influence the direction that went. And I'm like, I just graduated from college. I have no idea how I ended up in this room, but I'm actually getting an opportunity to talk to these incredible people. And so immediately I got super involved. Tom Hood was CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs. So again, very grateful to be in the room with that dude very early in my career. And that just immediately I was hooked. I was like, I want to be in these rooms with these incredible people. And, fast forward 13 years, I became the chair of the Maryland Association of CPAs, which, was definitely a highlight of my career, being part of that association that I loved so much, that did so much for me throughout my career. And now I'm able to help lead that organization. And, then you bring it back to kind of what Donny said, then this creates opportunities at the national level to get involved. So through my participation with the Maryland Association of CPAs, I then got involved with the American Institute of CPAs and have had just an unbelievable amount of opportunities that has created at the national level. So it's kind of like you can go from being like a nobody out of college to being in the rooms with the people who are actually making decisions. And we look now at our new CEO at the AICPA, Mark Koziel, who, we all know Donny has worked with very closely. I've worked with very closely. Liz, I believe you've collaborated with him. And, you all of a sudden become the who's who within this profession, where you actually are in the rooms when decisions are being made, that a lot of people like to just complain about those decisions. And we've actually been in the rooms when those decisions are being made. So, I mean, obviously I'm not passionate about it at all, as Liz knows.
I'll echo what you're saying, because that's the thing that really resonated for me. So coming from Hawaii, a very small state, having gone through like public education here as well as like University of Hawaii, so not one of your per se top tier states. I got a great education there though, but still that having my own small firm at the time I got involved at the national level, well, at the time I got involved in the state society level, it was just me. I had left PwC. I started that as my way to, hey, I really gotta get work somehow. And so by participating in these committees, I got to know other people. I got referrals coming in to me, which still today, 24 years later, or actually more than 24 years, I still get referrals from those set of people that I first met back then. But at the age of what was I, 26. I actually volunteered for an AICPA committee, got pulled onto the IT executive committee, which is actually where I met Byron. And I know Byron and I are close in age, so we are now operating on a national committee, but we're working with all of these, like, I remember one person was the head of IT assurance for BDO. These, really important people, and we're actually getting mentored by them. I worked on this project that was the first time the risk-based auditing standards got updated. And I'm with these national level partners at these big firms, and they're all like, well, we should do this and well, we should do that. And I'm like, well, wait, yes, I worked at PwC, but I was in a very small office. We did very simple audits. Like, help me understand. And they were so wonderful about actually teaching me, like, well, this is what this really means, and this is what you got to think about. And we actually wrote guidance. I'm 26, 27. I'm writing guidance that's published nationally about how to implement audit standards. It was like kind of crazy when I think back about it.
It's you're so right. I remember those days with iTech, and I've told so many people like about like being in the room when SOC was born, right? Like we were looking at those SOC standards and those things like as that was happening, and I can't imagine looking back on my career having not had those opportunities to be in those places to talk to those people. Like you said, I mean, some big wigs that I had no business talking to that listened. Kind of cool.
So
Yeah.
SOC, just to give the acronym, Service
Oh,
Organization Controls Reporting. Go ahead, Liz.
Um, from the perspective of the state to the national level, the AICPA functions very similarly to a state society, but at the national level, and gives more opportunity and more connection, I would say, across states than a society would be capable of doing. As well as, there's tons of programs within the AICPA. I mean, you can go look at their website and see all the things that they do. It's understanding the relationship there as well. And they also collaborate with state societies, which is nice to see. I think there's a lot of interest in what else do they do around the laws that govern our profession. And the AICPA does have a lobbying group, and they do work directly on influencing national legislation that affects our profession, including, publicly traded company type legislation. And so, you get even deeper into understanding the organizations around accounting, and you start looking at, okay, well, what is the SEC? What is the PCAOB? How do these things relate, right? And I think, from a basic understanding, the SEC oversees publicly traded exchanges. The PCAOB audits the firms that audit financial statements that report to the SEC. And the PCAOB is not a government entity. In fact, it is a separate board governed organization that does this independently. They also issue guidance and standards that firms have to follow if they audit financial statements that get reported to the SEC. And the PCAOB acronym, Public Company Accounting Oversight Board.
nailed it.
Just,
Peekaboo.
there are just so many acronyms in this profession. But I think it's important to understand each of these things. Now, someone might say, okay, well, you have state societies and state boards. Do you have a federal board of accountancy? Why don't we have that, guys?
No. Well, and so the reason we don't have that is peer review. So if you go back to the pre-Enron, pre-Peekaboo days, we were, I could be wrong on this, but I believe this is accurate. We were the only professional licensed group that was self-governing. So having only peer review where we were responsible for reviewing our own work. And when Enron failed, that's when the SEC said, hold up, guys, we now need a quasi-government organization. While PCAOB isn't a government organization, it was born from the government.
And is funded by the government.
Correct.
Ultimately.
So that's what really led to the PCAOB being established, was because the SEC felt that the peer review process within that is administered by the AICPA was not enough to ensure oversight of the audits. So one thing to add to what you were talking about, so similar to how we have lobbies at the state association, and you mentioned the AICPA has a lobby. So Maryland, in fact, just this past week, we had CPA Day, where a large percentage of Maryland CPAs go down to Annapolis, our state capital, and go into the Maryland Assembly and meet with our legislators to give their perspective. The AICPA does something similar. In May, during AICPA Council, is when we go and we meet with our federal legislators to share our feedback and thoughts on legislation that's coming up. And one thing that a lot of people do not realize, so the council, AICPA Council, is basically Congress of the accounting profession. So we have representatives from every single state based on the size of your state that show up. And this is where, the information is shared, there's decisions made, there's voting, those types of things. What a lot of people don't know is that is open to any CPA to attend. So in May, as a CPA, now you're not going to be reimbursed for your travel, but you can attend council, you can go meet with your federal legislators, and you can actually be part of those conversations and those lobby efforts at the federal level. So there's actually a lot of opportunities where you can get involved with those types of things, and you don't even have to necessarily be invited in. You can actually show up as a CPA.
Build off of Byron's mention of the self-governing. So even though PCAOB was brought in, that's really only for public companies. So for anything that's not public companies, we are still a self-governing profession. Since we're at the national level, the other things that come to play into here is also the FAF, the Financial Accounting Foundation, which is I might get this wrong, the overarching entity that also oversees the FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, and the GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Those are also kind of like pseudo-government, or this is also a pseudo-government entity that actually writes the standards for the accounting that we learn about in all of the textbooks. And these are all practitioners come in and participate. And they're also effectively associations where, like, the organization, whether it's FAF, FASB, or GASB, there's staff there that organize these things, but practitioners from all the different firms and companies all come in and participate to help set the standards. And that's where you'll see exposure drafts start to come out. That's where whether it's at the state level or at the national level, we all come in and we comment on it, say, well, there might be a problem with this because of that. So it's almost like we have our own little legislative process here in the way that we actually enact standards.
And I think we probably need a secondary episode to go through what is the process of standard setting in the CPA profession? How does it happen? What are the, different phases you get to comment on? Who governs what? How does that get implemented? How does that get followed? Right? All of those things are very complex as well. And I just want to clarify earlier, when I said the PCAOB was government funded, it was when it was initially built. So they funded the creation of the PCAOB. Now it is funded by fees that are imposed on any firm that issues public company financial statements, as well as broker-dealers. So at the end of the day, their money is coming from the people that they're overseeing. And, they're working with the SEC to ensure that the financial statements are not being materially misstated, causing another debacle like Enron.
Good clarification. I assume, do you know if the fines also go into the operating budget for PCAOB, or or where the fines go?
I am not 100% sure, actually.
Yeah, I don't
I
know
would
either.
assume they do. That would be my guess.
Yeah,
I know the biggest source of funding is their accounting support fees.
right. From the firms.
Mhm.
But we at the national level, since I mentioned GASB with the Government Accounting Standards Board, so the AICPA handles CPAs, which usually is more focused around uh, private and like regular businesses and nonprofits. When it's purely in the government space, the equivalent of the AICPA at the national level is the Association of Government Accountants, the AGA. The AGA also has chapters in various states. I've spoken for the Hawaii chapter here. So these are more chapters rather than full separate associations, the way the state societies are full associations in and of themselves. There's the AGA. Internal audit also has its own, the Institute of Internal Auditors, or the IIA. IT audit has its own, ISACA. That one, I'm going a blank right now. Information Systems and Control Association. That is also looking at IT audit and IT risk are kind of the areas that association covers. Am I missing any other major professional side? National level.
ITA.
Uh, that one's a little different. Let's hold that one. The one other, and their name just the IMA, the Institute of Management Accountants, which is really looking at the management account, basically controller, CFO side of things. And then why don't you explain ITA? Because IT is actually a little different, but it still also is an association of professionals.
Yeah, that's right. It is a little bit different. So that's the Information Technology Alliance. And that falls more into kind of these other associations, right? Where it's really a membership organization that people join in order to, share knowledge, get opportunities for education. There's some other work there. It's similar in a sense to a lineal or AGN, leading edge, CPA America, handful of alliances that are
And
membership
what are those?
organizations.
That's because that's the same thing. I'm like, now you bridge to another area, Byron.
But wait,
There's
there's
so
more.
many. It just keeps going, and that's it. So these are associate membership associations of generally, it similar operating organizations. So accounting firms in the case of Alineo and AGN and those types of things, where they're public accounting firms who are becoming members, and they put on all types of education opportunities, community opportunities, other community related interactions. It might be some sort of portal or something like that where you can share knowledge and best practices and things.
Byron says community, just to clarify it, he doesn't mean like your local community. He means like groups of people like auditors or tax professionals that are firm managers, firm partners that are getting together to kind of share best practices and other types of things amongst each other. So the differentiation I would make from the state societies and the AICPA and AGA and these others that I mentioned earlier, those are professional associations. So they're tied to our role as a professional individually, compared to these firm associations and even like ITA, I believe as well, are firm level. So the firm becomes the member of these associations, and they're trade associations rather than professional associations.
Great clarification. Just to simplify it.
So building on that, since I've worked with them, some of those more, the other things. So when you look at things like PwC or Deloitte or these big four, they really are these international networks. And that's another differentiation we have in the profession, are networks of firms, which generally share the same name as well as a common audit, quality management system. So that's these big, really big firms and the common names that you see compared to the associations, which are the names that Byron mentioned. These are all independent firms, operate independently, they audit independently, but what you'll see is they will collaborate together, for example, to serve a client. And that's one of the other ones I never knew these existed until I got involved in them. And when you look at the total numbers, like total revenue or total staff, these start to get up where they start to compete really with the big four in terms of the reach and their ability to service. So it's a different lens, and they get measured completely different too. And I can't remember they have an association that they feed up to internationally also, that also looks at what are the top networks, what are the top associations in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
Celia's just shaking her head.
I just leave it to accountants, leave it to CPAs to overcomplicate an industry.
There's a lot. And the other thing that we haven't even touched on, just to muddy the waters a little bit more, is there's also organizations and broader communities that are within the accounting industry that are not CPA specific. So there's a lot of those types of organizations as well that really like just continue this bubble to expand in, again, places and opportunities for people to share best practices and various educational opportunities. But it just, you continue to see more and more of those types of organizations beginning to show up as well.
Are there any countries founded by CPAs that exist in this world? I feel like with all this complication and politics and legislation and interactions between different political governing bodies, we should just have our own country.
I like it. The country of CPA.
That'd be scary, actually.
We'll just buy an island somewhere. It'll be
Let's take over
run very
Greenland.
financially effectively. Too soon, Donny.
But that does make me think. So international, I started the international. The other
Yeah.
things operating at the international level, so above the country level. So every country has their equivalent to the AICPA. Those all feed up to IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, which is the associate. So this is an association of associations of the country level association. So that's the top on the international side, on the professional side. And then we also have the other two that I know of. One is IASBA, the International
Yes.
Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, which sets the international standards, which generally gets adopted all nationally. That's one side for accounting and auditing, so financial standards and auditing standards. And then oh wait, no, that's the IAASB. Then IASBA is the International Ethics Standard Board for Accountants, which sets our international ethics standards as well. So those are the three entities I know operating internationally that also set standards for what's happening and provide practice guidance.
And they feed up to the Intergalactic Accountancy Board. I declare myself chairman, so.
I mean, I think there's opportunity for you to plant that flag. I'm pretty sure.
Just going to put it on my LinkedIn, chairman of Intergalactic Accountancy Board.
I mean,
done.
So what we could do, instead of fighting other countries to get our own country, we could start a whole nother planet.
Accurate, right?
Boom. Great ideas being born right here. This is for our 10-year prediction episode. We're just feeding where that's going to go.
Planet accountant.
I mean, I think we've tried every other form of community. Why are we not grouping by profession? Not really sure. I think with, all of our international commerce, we'll be fine.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I like it. Well, I think we've done a great job of clarifying and confusing the entire audience on all the things. But I would say, if you have any key takeaways from this conversation, I think just the distinction between the state board and the state societies, and then the AICPA, I think is kind of the core. All the other stuff is kind of like things that as you get involved with more and more things, you get exposed to and you begin to understand. But for anybody coming into the profession, I think those kind of three pieces are the things to really kind of keep your eyes on and understand those distinctions in conversations and decisions.
Well, and also understand where the rules you have to follow are coming from, right? I mean, there are rules at the state level you have to follow to be licensed, but there's also rules we have to follow in the way we do our jobs, in the accountancy that we do, right? And understanding where those rules come from and when they apply and where they apply and who's making them, right? I always want to know who's telling me what to do. So,
and for all those students out there, I know in the universities, you've got like your accounting club and Beta Alpha Psi and those things that you can be members of, but you can also go directly to the state society. I think every state society has a student membership. Some of them, actually quite a number of them, are actually free. And I know there's a partnership between the AICPA and a lot of the state societies as well. So if you become a state society member, you get AICPA membership, or the opposite maybe. That also occurs. So these are priced way cheaper than what we pay as practitioners. So if you go and sign up for those, you can get a direct connection in and have direct exposure to the practitioners, because you'll get invited to all the events. And I know for us in Hawaii, and I've seen several of the other state societies, when students come, it's like a buzz, because everyone's like, oh, you're the next generation. So you can get access to mentors and learn about different people's career paths as you try to figure out your own. And I'll also echo, if you're interested in those particular areas like governmental, internal audit, a lot of those chapters also have student memberships, or they would welcome students coming to those. In fact, some of them I know also even sponsor, because they do like lunches. Some of them will sponsor students to come so that you don't have to pay the lunch fee either. So reach out and explore and get exposure and figure out what part of our intergalactic profession you want to be a part of.
And there is such thing as a free lunch. You just have to learn something.
With that, it's lunchtime for me, so maybe we should call this a wrap.
I agree.
Me too.
I agree.
Thanks, guys. It's always fun.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.